Hey, today I want to talk to you about a paper I've read recently. The paper was actually published, I think, more than a year ago. It's called MemGPT. It's talking about how to have the LLM agent to have memory so that it'll be much more helpful. We actually renamed it to Letta and founded a company, and I'll talk about that later. But the talk will be Remember Me, Will You? So I tried to ask Claude, hey, do you remember me? And Claude said, I apologize, but I don't have the ability to remember previous conversations or users. It's kind of sad. And I asked ChatGPT, which does have memory, and it answered me, of course, John, I remember you. How have you been? What's new on your end? This is pretty heartwarming, right? But beyond that, I think it's obvious why this is going to be very helpful and practical in applications. For example, if I'm talking about a project and I'm needing advice from a colleague, then I don't have to fill him in with all the background of who I am, what's my name, what's my role in the company, what this project is about, and how far has it been, who are the key stakeholders, and what's my goal, things like that. We probably have the previous conversation and the context for us to directly dive deep into this conversation. And that's going to be very helpful. If I'm talking to ChatGPT, if it does not have memory, I might have to fill them in with all the conversations, and I have to do it again over and over. And especially if I'm exceeding the context window, I have to somehow summarize it in a way that's fitting in the context window and continue the conversation. This can be just a burden in the beginning, but I think as I use the personalized agent more and more, it's going to be prohibitively cumbersome, right? So I think it's obvious why we need to have memories in those agents. So a naive way to do it is just what I mentioned, right? Fixing it, try to squeeze it in a context window. And we're going to have longer and longer context windows. GPT-4 context window is pretty long already. We start from very short from GPT-1, 2, 3, and 3.5 into 4. At GPT-4, we can already have a context window which roughly fits 24,000 English words or 48 pages. I think if you're talking about single topics, pretty long enough. But if you're trying to span it across the whole history of your career, of your family, of your life, and if you have a human assistant, right, I think you would expect the human assistant to be much better than that in their memory capacity. Or you may want to bring in your internal documents and to have the agent to read all those documents, remember those, and then help you doing that. Then in that case, this context window is not nearly enough compared to a real human assistant. So these authors from UC Berkeley, they wrote a paper called MemGPT towards LLMs as operating systems. And let me just whet your appetite a little bit. So this is what they claim that will happen. How was you today? How was your day today? Fun. My boyfriend James baked me a birthday cake. And the system immediately knows, of course, I'll say, oh, wow, happy birthday. But then it'll say, okay, I need to remember two facts. One, the birthday is February the 7th. And also, the boyfriend name is James. And then in a later conversation, the chatbot said, did you do anything else to celebrate your birthday? Yeah, I went to Six Flags. And then the chatbot immediately says, okay, I'll search my recall storage. Did we ever mention Six Flags before? It seems like 1 year ago or half a year ago, the user said, James and I actually first met at Six Flags. Did you go with James? It's so cute how both met there. So with these conversation, it's very obvious that the memories are working and very helpful. So how did they do that? So they designed such a system as depicted by this diagram. And it might look like a lot, but behind it, you can use the analogy of a computer system, right? When you have a computer, you have limited memory, but you can always use your hard drive as a secondary storage that you can pull information from and put it into the memory. In fact, when your memory requirement is more than you physically have, you can use virtual memories and temporarily store information on the hard drive and retrieve it later. So this is similar to that concept. Let me go through it bit by bit with you so that it'll be easier to digest. A system without memory will simply be this block, right? I have a blue first in, first out queue. It's first in, first out because it's basically a conversation history of the chatbot said A, user said B, chatbot said C, blah, blah, blah. And then eventually maybe the user said something, and we're asking the large language model to complete that answer from the chatbot, which is the output buffer, and they together will be part of the context window, and eventually it'll fill and overfill, and then the previous conversations were lost. How do we manage that? Well, this author said, we can do it via a queue manager. What happens is, let's say when I'm already noticed I have more than 85% full in the context window, I can evict maybe 50% of all the previous messages. And I don't throw them away, I put them in the recall storage so that I can look it up later. And at the same time, for the messages I threw away, I make a short summary to it, which is purple, and I put it there. And I can continue to converse because I have 50% of context window relieved and can be used for new conversations. Note that the purple part is actually recursive. It's recursive because maybe the previous time I'm evicting half a message to the recall storage, I did the summarization of that once. So when I summarize this time, I'm summarizing the previous summary plus some new information over here. So I'm summarizing recursively on the previous conversation. And of course, when later I need to have detailed exact messages more than a summary, we can also ask the queue manager, hey, queue manager, can you search the previous conversation to me? Did we talk about 6 flags before? In this example, you remember, right? The recall storage can try to search 6 flags if the large language model thinks that, all right, it's a good time for me to search for the recall storage before I answer. That's a good example. And you may find that sometimes the recall storage is more than what you need. For example, you may need to remember who the other person is, what's their role, what's the gender, when is the birthday, and what's your role, and what's the tone you should use in talking to that person. So all of these are not very specific to a conversation. It's just general information to keep at the back of your head. And those are just working context. It can also be changed by a function similarly to the recall storage. For example, in the conversation, we mentioned that, remember the birthday, remember who the boyfriend is, those are just part of the working context. They also call them sometimes in the code core memory. And core memory can be modified. For example, when the user said, actually, James and I broke up, and then we can have a working context to replace boyfriend with ex-boyfriend. That also helps. In fact, similarly, the working context plus the first in first out queue plus the output buffer, they're not enough to have this flow to be working because we need to have system instructions to guide the LLM to decide when are you saving this into the core memory or the working context, when are you going to evict messages to the recall storage, things like that. So the system instructions are read-only information, they're static, and they are basically telling the LLM when to call a tool to do the working context, to do the queue manager, versus just keep conversing. So the system instructions and working context and first in first out queue, there is a prompt tokens, and they, together with completion tokens, constitute the whole LLM finite context window. They cannot exceed that. And if we do have the need, then we have the recall storage as persistent storage, likely database, to relieve pressure from this memory load. Okay, just before I finish, there's one more thing. Remember that we're using recall storage when we don't have enough memory to fill the first in first out queue of the conversation history? Similar things may happen for the working context. Maybe we have too much background for us to remember. It could be just a lot of facts accrued over time, or it could be I'm trying to have the background information to be a lot, like reading a few books as a background. So we can have archival storage, which is basically the secondary storage for working context, just as how recall storage is a secondary context of the first in first out queue of the conversation history. And I talked to the author, asked for when do we decide which to use? Essentially, the large language model will decide, based on the system instructions, is there more likely to be searched from the archival storage or from the recall storage? Archival storage, similar example. Who won the first Nobel Prize in physics? Then it can search for Nobel physics. And maybe actually in the first page of archival storage search, we don't see a good answer to the agent will continue to search. Hey, when is the second page of the previous search results? Maybe in the second page, we'll find out is Wilhelm Conrad Röntgen, and it'll pull that into the answer. All right, so let's see the performance of this whole complicated system. First thing is multiple document. If you know retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, what it does is similar to MemGPT, except for that usually we just have a vector embedding for the question, and we have a vector embedding of the truncated documents, and we just search, right, how many embedded, what truncated document have similar embeddings to the question embedding, and I just list up the top 3, top 10, and based on that, I put it into the prompt and see if I can answer the question correctly. So the author is comparing that method with this agent-based method, which means if I need to look at page 2, page 3, I can continue to look at them. And you can see that the MemGPT with GPT-4 or GPT-4 Turbo have highest accuracy flat independent of the documents retrieved, while other models, GPT-4 Turbo being very impressive in doing RAG, but others, they all decay when the document is beyond, let's say, obviously 50%. The drop in performance is pretty obvious. And obviously, there's further conversation. I saw it on the Discord as well. The MemGPT can also benefit from more advanced RAG techniques. For example, a smaller re-ranking model maybe will improve the performance. Yes, it can improve the performance of other models. So the other models' score here probably is lower than they could be. But I think from that token, MemGPT can also even do better, right? Oh, and similar, because MemGPT can go page after page, it's kind of, in a sense, in my opinion, I can use the word nonlinear. It can deal with deeply nested, more nonlinear information. For example, for a key value pair storage retrieval, if it's nested, for key 1, I have value 1. Can I use value 1 as key 2 to keep searching for value 2, and so on? So in this example, you can see that the author can search for nested information up to level 3. I didn't even test further. I think maybe it can. While if you just use large language model, once the level increases, you can't do well at all. Notice that the MemGPT, even with GPT 3.5, is far from MemGPT GPT-4. The author explained that is because GPT 3.5 has limited tool using capability upon train time. So that's why GPT-4 is good. Actually, in my actual use playing with it, I think GPT-4 Mini actually works very well. GPT-4 Mini. So, all this is awesome. What's the drawback? I'm actually thinking when I was reading this paper and playing with this toy, is cost an issue? And of course, the cost means I'm using more tokens and probably it takes more time because of the back and forth. So this is what I read on Discord as well. I'm not alone. This user tried 10 short text messages and each consuming 10 to 50 tokens calculated by a tick token for text only, but the real usage is 30K. And the answer is, obviously, we have all the system message, the call memory, and the latest messages, and also the internal monologue repeatedly. It's going to almost fill the context window. So this is maybe an issue of both money and time, but in my opinion, may not be that big of a deal because I think it should go down as we continue to grow as AI infra. The AI infra continues to scale, the cost is getting lower. I think it's going to be as low as the cost of electricity. I think AI is the new electricity. So compared to the capability this tool is bringing, I think this drawback is not a big concern to me. All right, so if you're interested, feel free to try it yourself. Their website is www.letta.com, and yes, they founded a company and renamed MemGPT to Letta. And this is their architecture. So I was planning to stop here, but actually after I made the slides and before I recorded this, I saw that they had a short course collaborating with deeplearning.ai, talking about how LLMs as operating systems, agent memory. The two authors, the Charles Packer and Sarah Wooters, they're actually very active in Discord, very helpful, by the way. They did a great job, in my opinion, in this class, and I took the class. I enjoyed it. If you want to dive deeper in using Letta or playing with Letta to get the concept, I think it's very worth taking the class, and I strongly recommend it. So thank you for your time, and please leave any questions you may have in the comment section.